Today, I want to talk about a story that's very near and dear to my heart that has been with me basically my entire life. Crazy to think that. And that story is Lord of the Rings. I think it gets kind of mystified. It's become a bit of a legend. It's on a pedestal in some ways in the fantasy world. And today in this video, I kind of want to take it off that pedestal for a second and talk about it as what it is to me, rather than what it is to fantasy as a whole. Kind of ground it in some ways. Talk about the way that it's impacted me and why I love it so much. There are very few stories that have actually impacted me the way that the Lord of the Rings has, and I'm remembering that as I've been doing a rewatch of the extended editions of the movies. Some of my earliest memories of any movie at all were actually Lord of the Rings, which interesting parenting choice on my parents' part, but also I'm very grateful for in a lot of ways. I remember one of the clearest images in my mind of watching a movie as a kid was watching as the Uruk-hai are being created in Isengard and they kind of pull this fleshy lump out of the wall and then tear open this membrane and we see this nasty orc stick his head out. So gross. To this day grosses me out. But I just remember watching that in my mind being blown of what is this? I don't think I knew what was going on for most of the time, but I do remember watching, sitting down and watching that with my dad, and it unlocked something, some part of me that I didn't know could be unlocked. Also, one of my clearest memories of being a little kid was in preschool. Our teachers would sit across from us, and I don't know if this was just me, this is what I chose to talk about, or if I could have talked about anything, I'm not sure, but I was telling my teacher about a dream I had, and the dream was about Lord of the Rings, and there was a moment in it where the main point of the dream was orcs were overrunning my house and my family was defending the house from the orcs. And my brother was dressed up like Legolas and my mom was dressed up like Gimli and everyone in my family was one of the characters in the Fellowship. Yeah, we were defending the house from this onslaught of orcs. And looking back, that was clearly my own rendition of Helm's Deep happening in my head while I slept. And it wasn't a nightmare either. I wasn't scared of it. I know something, okay, I was aware that scary things were happening in Lord of the Rings, but I wasn't personally scared of those things, if that makes sense. I'm the type of person who gets very scared at horror movies and things like that, but for some reason, when I was a kid watching Lord of the Rings, I knew for a fact that this is fiction and there's nothing that can actually be dangerous about it. I think something that happens with horror movies is, there's tapping into existing, pre-existing fears in the audience and the idea that, maybe this could happen. You're going to think twice when you go into a bathroom at night because of a scene you saw in a horror movie. Things like that. Whereas Lord of the Rings, I think, was so disconnected from anything I'd ever seen before that I didn't have a context in which to be scared of it, if that makes sense. At least that's the best kind of estimation I can arrive at as to why I wasn't scared of it. Anyways, so I'm watching the extended editions again now as a 23-year-old. Last time I watched them, I was 20. So it's been about 3 years, maybe a little more than that. And it's cool revisiting it now because I'm seeing more of those connections with my childhood self than I had before. I don't know why. I always love watching them. I watched them a couple years ago and then I watched them a few years before that. Every once in a while I'll do a rewatch, but for some reason it's hitting different this time. Where I'm almost I'm better equipped to see the ways in which it's impacted me, which maybe that's because since I last rewatched them, I've gotten way more into reading as a whole. That could totally be part of it. I now have the broader context of fantasy as a genre and everything that I love about fantasy. And now I'm able to narrow down specifically what I love about Lord of the Rings as opposed to fantasy in general. Maybe that's it, but I'm really getting to kind of reconnect with that childlike wonder that I felt watching them originally. When I see them take the Uruk-hai out of the slimy shrink wrap, I don't know. It's striking a chord deep within me that I forgot was strikeable, if that makes sense. So in 2022, I started reading the books for the first time, which like it took me long enough, more than 20 years since I had seen them for the first time. And I hadn't ever thought of picking them up until relatively recently. So slowly over time, visiting tons of used bookstores, I amassed this little collection of paperbacks. I know a lot of people like to make fun of the art that are on these editions, but I personally am a big fan. I think it's like retro and campy, and I really like how it looks. I think it's like goofy in just the right way. And these are kind of not my beater copies, because like, okay, I found the Two Towers in such good condition. I don't want anything to happen about it. But these other two, for example, are like a little bit crusty. So like, I don't necessarily care if anything happens to them. I don't want to shred them, of course, but like I can put them in my backpack without worrying about it. We'll leave it at that. I also got a hold of this special edition. I think Mariner Books sent me this a while back, which is very generous of them. This is such a freaking nice copy. And this one is like, this is my baby. I put this on my bookshelf and I leave it there. And sometimes I'll look at the maps inside and I'll like flip through the pages and look at how beautiful it is. But then again, this isn't a copy that I'm like reading very regularly at all, if at all. I also got these editions, which are from HMH. I love the cover art on these. I think these look so nice. They like preserve the vibe of the stories perfectly, in my opinion, while also being like a kind of almost cartoony take where I'm obsessed. I love the way that these look, and the way that they feel in my hand is also nice. They're like trade paperback sized. They're fantastic quality. But I'm also not worried about them. I could also throw these in a backpack and be okay with it. I definitely think that this one is the least cool out of the three. I just don't love this cover design quite as much. But these two, absolutely killing it. I think those are awesome. So those are my copies of The Lord of the Rings. I've got a few other like Hobbit editions and The Silmarillion and The Fall of Numenor, all those. And funny enough, I haven't read all three books yet. I've read The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, but I still haven't got around to The Return of the King. So I need to do that. And I'm very much looking forward to it. Again, like I certainly have to be in the mood for it. They are super slow paced. It is very flowery language. And when the time is right, it's very right for those books. But it just has to come around. It has to feel natural to me. And also, I should note, I get why people don't like the books. Compared to the movies, they are way slower paced. I don't know. It's almost like seeing a play, like a Shakespeare play, versus reading the play. Like, it just comes to life in a different way. And I totally don't fault anyone for seeing the movies first. After all, that's what I did. And I think a successful adaptation is when I love a movie and then I read the book and the book feels like incredible bonus content to the story that I already love. Where like if there's too much of a disconnect between the book and the movie, then it feels like two separate stories. But when it flows nicely between I loved the movie, now let me get more out of it by reading the books, that's great. I think that means that you nailed the spirit of it. Even if you had to change some of the details here and there, leave some things out, it feels really nice to read the book after, if that makes sense. That might get a couple pitchforks raised. I think it's fine if you watch the movies first. And also, I think it's totally fine if you watch the movies and love the movies and then read the books and don't love the books. It's okay. After all, I consider myself a very big Lord of the Rings fan, having not finished reading the trilogy yet. I don't think that's a prerequisite to being a fan by any means. Like, I do have mixed feelings about Lord of the Rings' like legendary status. It almost becomes a cliche in a way where it's, if you don't mention the Lord of the Rings when you're talking about fantasy, it's like almost assumed that you just don't know anything about the genre, which I think is harsh. I think that's not a great approach to it. I love Lord of the Rings. I think it's so influential. I see its influence everywhere. And also knowing that like there are fantasy fans, there are fantasy authors who have never read Lord of the Rings. And while it started something new, that doesn't automatically make it the best. It just makes it super influential, which I do think it is. And I do happen to think it's one of the best, but like, I don't feel like I need to put a first place, second place, third place on them. I don't think that's relevant, especially when there are so many awesome books. Why do we put numbers on them? Okay, this will start me down a rabbit hole, but I do not like star ratings for books. I also think ranking them is weird. I mean, I could rank them if I had to, but like, I don't want to. It's not interesting to me. That's not to say I won't ever do it. I'm getting off track. So I'd love to hear down in the comments what your relationship with this awesome story is. And that's what I call it. I call it a story because it's not one book. It's not a trilogy. So what is it? It's a story. It can be a book. It can be 3 books. It's both. Which also I think is another Catholic allegory that that Tolkien probably wasn't going for, but definitely achieved, is like, you know, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, God, the Fellowship, the Two Towers, the Return of the King, Lord of the Rings. There's kind of like a holy trinity thing going on there. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you think that talking about books is just as important as reading them, I think you'd be a great fit to be a subscriber of this channel. And a big thank you to my patrons. They make it possible to do what I do here. If you'd like to see your name on the screen here and get some additional perks, check out the Patreon link in my description. And if you'd like to see a video that I made a couple years ago about my Tolkien collection, which I do need to update at some point, but if you want to see that, click the link right here and it'll take you right there. Okay, that's all. See ya.